Okay, I'm making this because of a topic that's been really bugging me lately. So, a couple of days ago, I attended a Department of Commerce meeting promoting Trump's tax cuts. While I was there, I got into a debate with some random businessman on the legality of the Federal Reserve note, or as most people know it as the US dollar. As I'm having this debate, he tells me that my opinion does not matter and that I'm wrong because the Supreme Court says it allowed, which is not only shocking, but obviously wrong because there are many times the Supreme Court was completely wrong in its decisions. So I'm going to give my reasons why it is unconstitutional for the US dollar to exist and how the Supreme Court has done a great disservice to the country by allowing the federal government the power to print bills of credit. I base my statements on arguments from three areas, which are the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, political history, and economic history. In the Constitution, the Founding Fathers reference money in a couple ways. The first two being in Article 1, Section 8, which gives and denies powers to the federal government. In Article 1, Section 8, the federal government is allowed to borrow money on the credit of the United States, but it cannot print it or lend it out. Secondly, it states that the federal government can coin money, regulate the value thereof in a foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures. The federal government can only coin money and fix the value they represent. Nowhere in Article 1, Section 8 does it say the government can emit bills of credit, which is just another name for paper money, or make anything legal tender. And to what exactly they can coin? Well, that is answered in Article 1, Section 10. In Article 1, Section 10, which gives and denies powers to the state and local governments, it says that no state shall coin money, emit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin, tender a payment in payment of debts. If the states can only make gold and silver legal tender and they can't coin money, which is something the federal government can do, logical thinking concludes that the federal government can only coin gold and silver. And coining means taking gold and silver and physically turning it into a coin. To go further into detail on how I know the federal government cannot emit bills of credit, I refer to the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers are a collection of 85 articles written by James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay, and they were written to promote the ratification of the United States Constitution by explaining in depth what each part means. In Federalist 44, which is written by James Madison, the father of the Constitution, thus he should know what it means, he uses the word alloy when talking about the right of coining money being taken from the states. And I put this because of one of the arguments the businessman said. He said the Constitution needs to be interpreted, which is how the federal government gets its power to print paper money. And that is the job of the Supreme Court to interpret the Constitution, which is wrong. That is completely wrong. The job of the Supreme Court is to apply the Constitution, not interpret it. The Constitution is written in a language everyone in America can read, and in no way can you get paper money from the Constitution or the Federalist Papers when James Madison specifically mentions the word alloy. Now, this part I'm going to read is straight from Federalist 44, which I think is interesting. It says, the extension of the prohibition to bills of credit must give pleasure to every citizen in proportion to his love of justice and his knowledge of the true springs of public prosperity. The loss which America has sustained since the peace from the pestilent effects of paper money on the necessary confidence between man and man, on the necessary confidence of public councils, on the industry and morals of the people, and on the character of republican government. And no one of these mischiefs is less incident to a power in the states to emit paper money than to coin gold and silver. The power to make anything but gold and silver tender in payment of debts is withdrawn from the states on the same principle that of issuing paper currency. The entirety of Federalist 44, Section 1 talks about money, but I specifically use those because they are James Madison, the father of the Constitution, talking about the problems with paper money, which spans almost the entirety of human existence. So from the Constitution and the Federalist Papers, it is obvious to anyone that has intellectual integrity to see that the federal government has no power or actual authority to be doing what it does by making paper money through the Federal Reserve. So as I said earlier, the Supreme Court and the rest of the federal government has done a great disservice to the country by ignoring the Constitution and usurping powers not granted to them. Now, I'm going to talk about the political history that reinforces my stance on the fact that the government cannot emit bills of credit. So a lot of people don't know this, but before the Constitution was signed in 1787, the Founding Fathers made several drafts of the Constitution. Out of the several drafts, one of them allowed the federal government to emit bills of credit. And in James Madison's notes from August 16, 1787, he stated that the subject of paper money was debated at great length. Multiple people from the start were against it and considered it a deal breaker. John Langdon, who was a founding father from New Hampshire, was quoted as saying he'd rather reject the entire plan than include those words. George Read likened the words which were allowed to the federal government to print bills of credit to the mark of the beast from the Old Testament. And in a vote to allow the federal government to emit bills of credit, it was struck down in a 9-2 vote. So by historical standards alone, the government has no right to print bills of credit. Fast forward about 85 years, and this exact same problem was taken to the Supreme Court, and this time the court had it right. In the Supreme Court case of Hebron versus Griswold, It was stated that while the federal government was authorized to coin money, that power was distinct from the power to make paper legal tender. However, that right decision was overturned in the case of Knox versus Lee in 1871. In Knox versus Lee, the court said that making paper money legal tender did not conflict with Article 1 of the Constitution, and they came to this conclusion by arguing that Congress can manipulate the value of precious metals to the point where it can be inherently worthless as paper money. This decision was so wrong because of it that there were two other cases known as Parker versus Davis and Juilliard versus Greenman, and together these three cases went down in history as legal tender cases. What makes these cases worse is that the Supreme Court took the arguments of the Founding Fathers from the Constitution and the Federalist Papers and disregarded them by saying that the framers could not anticipate all governmental needs, and that the necessary and proper clause gives the government broad unlimited powers to do whatever it wants, which is obviously nonsense if you read the Constitution and the Federalist Papers. So I keep repeating this, and I'll probably keep repeating it for the rest of my life. The Supreme Court has done such a great disservice to this country, and very soon the consequences of these mistakes are going to come to fruition. And my last case against the government printing money goes back to my earlier statement how this problem has existed almost for the totality of human history, is by going in depth in economic history. There are many cases of the government destroying its own currency, and from old ones like Rome to more modern ones like Venezuela. But the example I use is the Mississippi bubble because of the many similarities to America's mistakes. The Mississippi bubble was a currency bubble that was created from the monetary theories of the exiled Scottish economist John Law, who I consider one of the precursors to the Keynesian school of economics. John Law's monetary theory revolved around the assumption that money was only a means of exchange, that it did not constitute wealth, and that national wealth depended on trade. John Law believed that it was the unpredictable supply of gold and silver that was hurting the economy of France at the time, rather than economic problems, and at that time France was in a depression from high taxes, courtesy of massive military welfare from the War of Spanish Succession. And in 1716, John Law received the French government's permission to establish a national bank, a central bank, and this bank, which took in deposited gold and silver and issued paper banknotes in return, which is paper money. John Law then linked the banknotes to the shares of a struggling trade company, the Mississippi Company. And over time, the explosive demand for the shares of this company caused the total amount of paper money banknotes in circulation to increase 186% in 1 year due to the fact that the banknotes were in such popular demand by the public. This expansion of money supply resulted in a powerful inflationary episode in which the price of goods doubled between July 1719 and December 1720. And in 1720, around January, the shares of the company started falling because investors decided to take some of their profits in the form of gold coins. And later on in the year, in May 1720, when John Law decided that the company's shares were overvalued, so he started devaluing the shares, and the devaluation of the shares and banknotes caused an intense public uproar, which resulted in a compromise in which the banknotes were restored, but payment in precious metal was stopped. So instead of getting gold and silver coins like people wanted, they would just get more paper money. Despite this compromise, the French public was in complete outrage against the bank and its near worthless paper banknotes. This is very similar to what is happening now in America, with the Federal Reserve just creating paper money and devaluing it as much as it has over the last couple decades from 1913 to now. From 1913, the U.S. dollar has lost 98% of its value. And I really use it because I always try to explain to people that it's not taxes that are hurting everyone in America. It is governmental spending that is damaging the economy. The government cannot and will not ever be able to collect enough to cover what it spends, so the government has to pay for things through inflation. And inflation is the expansion of the money supply, that is the very definition of inflation. And the Keynesians, who pretty much control this country, try to say that inflation is rising prices, but in reality, rising prices is a consequence of inflation because you are devaluing your money. So just like France and the Mississippi bubble, America has a currency problem because that is what the next crisis is going to be for America. It is going to be a currency crisis, not just America. It's going to be a lot of other nations because the amount of debt floating around is unprecedented in the history of economics. And this crisis is going to be a lot worse than the 2008 financial crisis, because the only thing that stopped the 2008 financial crisis was the fact that people just piled into the US dollar. and then the Fed came in with 0% interest rates and quantitative easing. But as when those things start going away, well, then that's it. We're gonna go right back into this crisis, and none of us know how long we have left. So if you haven't started preparing for this crisis, now's your only chance, because if you wait too long, then you've waited too long, and the window's gonna close for you. So people need to learn. You need to educate yourself. Like, no one's gonna teach you this stuff in a school. They don't care.